Of all the recorded sightings of the legendary black-eyed children, 5 stand out for the terror they instilled and the tangible evidence they left behind, evidence that defies conventional understanding. In the vast tapestry of unexplained phenomena, few tales grip the human imagination as tightly as those involving the black-eyed children. These strange, enigmatic figures, typically appearing as seemingly innocent children with hollow, jet-black eyes, have been reported across the world, each encounter more unnerving than the last. Those misfortunate enough to cross paths with these children experience the unshakable scar and a lingering sense of dread that no amount of rational explanation can erase. Particularly striking are the cases of the surveillance footage from a gas station in Oregon and the security camera footage from a Las Vegas suburb. These incidents not only showcase the eerie nature of these encounters, but also leave a lasting imprint, a mark that forces us to question the nature of these beings. As you delve deeper into these stories, be prepared to confront the inexplicable, where reality and nightmare blur, leaving only fear and uncertainty in their wake. Here are the top 5 strangest modern sightings of black-eyed children, meticulously documented and chillingly real. Number 5, the abandoned playground of Clinton, Oklahoma. It was supposed to be just another ordinary evening for Mason Turner, a local journalist known for his unshakable skepticism. That all changed when he received an anonymous tip about strange occurrences at an abandoned playground on the outskirts of Clinton. What he found there would leave him questioning everything he believed. The journalist's journey. Mason Turner had made a name for himself by debunking urban legends. His column in the local newspaper, the Clinton Chronicle, was widely read for its logical explanations of the paranormal. Ghost sightings, UFOs, haunted houses, you name it. Mason had an answer. So, when an anonymous tip came in about strange occurrences at an old abandoned playground just outside of town, Mason was intrigued but not overly concerned. The playground had been closed for years after a series of accidents led the town council to declare it unsafe. Since then, it had fallen into disrepair, becoming a place of whispered rumors and teenage dares. The tipster claimed that strange lights had been seen at the playground at night, and that some locals had reported seeing children playing there, children who shouldn't have been there. Mason decided to investigate armed with his camera, a flashlight, and his usual dose of skepticism. He arrived at the playground just before dusk, parking his car at the edge of the overgrown field that separated the playground from the nearest road. As he walked towards the rusted swings and broken slides, the air around him seemed to thicken, and the usual sounds of the evening, crickets chirping, birds singing, faded into an eerie silence. The encounter Mason reached the center of the playground, where the swing set stood motionless, the chains creaking slightly in the breeze. He began snapping pictures, noting the state of decay and the general creepiness of the place, but so far, nothing out of the ordinary. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a heavy, oppressive silence settled over the playground. Mason's heart began to race, and a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. It was then that he noticed them, 2 children standing at the far end of the playground, just beyond the seesaw. They were completely still, watching him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. The children appeared to be around 9 or 10 years old, a boy and a girl, both dressed in old-fashioned clothing that seemed out of place. Their skin was pale, almost translucent in the fading light, but it was their eyes that caught Mason's attention. Black, devoid of any whites or irises, just solid, inky black. Mason's instincts screamed at him to leave, but his curiosity held him in place. He slowly raised his camera to take a picture, but as soon as he pressed the shutter, the children vanished. One moment they were there, and the next, the space they had occupied was empty. The sudden disappearance left Mason's heart pounding in his chest. Panic surged through him as he scanned the playground, searching for any sign of the children, but they were gone. His rational mind tried to come up with an explanation. Maybe it was a trick of the light, maybe he was just tired, but deep down he knew something was wrong. He turned and hurried back to his car, feeling the weight of unseen eyes on him the entire way. The evidence. When Mason returned home, he immediately uploaded the photos from his camera to his computer. Most of the images were exactly what he expected, shots of an old, run-down playground, but then he came across the last photo he had taken. His breath caught in his throat as he stared at the screen. There, in the center of the frame, were the 2 children. Their faces were obscured by the low light, but their black eyes were clearly visible, staring directly at the camera. The image was blurry, as if the camera itself had struggled to capture the moment, but there was no mistaking the dark, soulless eyes. Mason sat back in his chair, his mind racing. He had spent years debunking the paranormal, but this was something he couldn't explain. The photograph was real, and so were the children. But what were they? Why had they appeared at the playground? And most importantly, what did they want? Over the following days, Mason tried to find answers. He scoured the internet looking for any mention of black-eyed children, and was shocked to find that his encounter was not unique. There were dozens of reports from all over the world, each one eerily similar to his own experience. The children would appear, ask for help, often a ride home or entry into a house, and then vanish without a trace. Mason's once unshakable skepticism began to waver. The more he read, the more convinced he became that these children were not of this world. But without more evidence, he knew his story would be dismissed as just another urban legend. So, he kept the photograph to himself, only sharing it with a select few in the hopes of finding someone who could help him understand what he had witnessed. To this day, the abandoned playground in Clinton remains a place of unease, a spot where the line between reality and the supernatural is blurred. And for Mason Turner, The memory of those black-eyed children is a constant reminder that some mysteries are better left unsolved. Number 4. The Midnight Visitor in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. A series of strange knocks at the door in the dead of night left Cindy Harrington and her family on edge, but nothing could have prepared them for the sight that awaited when they finally opened it. The quiet neighborhood. Cindy Harrington lived with her husband and 2 children in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Their house, nestled at the end of a cul-de-sac, was the picture of normalcy: white picket fence, well-tended lawn, and a cozy interior filled with the warmth of family life. The Harringtons were well liked by their neighbors and lived a life free of drama or intrigue. That changed one cold winter night, when Cindy was awakened by a strange noise just after midnight. It was a steady, rhythmic knocking at the front door. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. At first she thought it might be the wind or perhaps a prank, but the knocks persisted, growing louder and more insistent. Cindy's husband, Tom, was still asleep, so she decided to investigate herself. As she crept down the stairs, the knocking continued, echoing through the silent house. By the time she reached the bottom step, a sense of unease had settled over her, a feeling that something was very, very wrong. The face at the door. Cindy approached the door cautiously, peeking through the peephole. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw 2 children standing on her porch, a boy and a girl, no older than 8 or 9. They were dressed in clothes that looked old-fashioned, almost like something out of a black and white photograph. The boy wore a button-up shirt and trousers, while the girl was dressed in a plain dress with a high collar. At first, Cindy felt a pang of concern. What were these children doing outside in the cold at this hour? But as she continued to watch them, that concern quickly turned to fear. There was something off about the way they stood so still, their faces hidden in shadow. And then there were their eyes, completely black, as if someone had gouged out their souls and replaced them with darkness. The children seemed to sense her hesitation because they began to speak. Their voices were soft, almost hypnotic, as they asked to be let inside. "We're lost," the boy said. "We need to come in." Cindy's blood ran cold at the sound of their voices. There was no emotion in them, no inflection, just a flat, monotonous tone that made her skin crawl. She wanted to help them, but every instinct screamed at her to keep the door shut. Unable to speak, she simply shook her head, her hand trembling on the doorknob. The children's voices grew more insistent, repeating their request. "Please, let us in. We're cold. We're lost." The boy took a step forward, and for a brief moment, Cindy was sure he was going to force his way inside. But then, as quickly as they had appeared, the children turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness at the edge of the yard. The residue Cindy stood frozen by the door for several minutes after they left, her heart racing. When she finally regained her senses, she rushed back upstairs to wake Tom. She tried to explain what had happened, but her words came out jumbled, and it wasn't until Tom saw the fear in her eyes that he realized something was seriously wrong. They called the police, who arrived within minutes and searched the area, but there was no sign of the children, no footprints in the snow, no sign of anyone having been outside at all. The officers took Cindy's statement, but it was clear they were skeptical. They suggested that maybe it had been a prank or a dream, but Cindy knew what she had seen. It wasn't until the police had left that Cindy noticed something strange on the doorknob. There was a sticky black residue, a substance she had never seen before. She wiped it off with a tissue, but the residue clung to the metal, almost as if it was alive. It took several attempts to clean it completely, and even then a faint stain remained. The next day, Cindy sent the tissue with the residue to a local lab for analysis. The results were inconclusive. The lab could not identify the substance, only noting that it was organic in nature, but unlike anything they had seen before. The experience left Cindy and her family shaken, and for weeks afterward they kept the doors and windows locked tight at night. The aftermath word of Cindy's encounter spread through the neighborhood, and soon other residents began reporting strange sightings of children with black eyes. Some claimed to have seen them standing in the shadows at the edge of their yards, while others reported hearing soft knocking at their doors late at night. The community, once a quiet and peaceful place, was now on edge, with residents looking over their shoulders and double-checking their locks before bed. Cindy's experience with the black-eyed children changed her life forever. She became more reclusive, hesitant to leave the house after dark, and a deep-seated fear replaced her once outgoing and friendly nature. She refused to talk about the incident with anyone outside of her family, and even then, only in hushed tones. Tom, who had always been a skeptic, found himself unable to dismiss his wife's experience. The black residue on the doorknob, the unidentifiable substance, it was all too real to ignore. He began to research similar encounters, uncovering a disturbing pattern of sightings from around the world. The stories were all eerily similar: children with black eyes appearing out of nowhere, asking for help or entry, and leaving behind a sense of dread and confusion. Despite their fear, the Harringtons never moved from their home. They installed security cameras and motion sensor lights, hoping to catch any sign of the children if they ever returned. But as the years passed, the sightings in the neighborhood dwindled, and life slowly returned to normal. But for Cindy, the memory of that night never faded. She still hears the knocking sometimes in the dead of night, when the house is silent and the world is asleep. She knows it's just her mind playing tricks on her, but the fear is always there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to remind her that the black-eyed children are real and that they could come back at any time. Before we get to number 3, are you enjoying this video? Like and subscribe for more spine-chilling mysteries. We appreciate you watching. Number 3, the surveillance footage from a gas station in Oregon. It was a typical night shift for Josh Lane, the sole employee at a remote gas station in Oregon, until he reviewed the surveillance footage and found something that made his blood run cold. The night shift. Josh Lane was used to the quiet solitude of the night shift. The gas station he worked at was located in a remote part of Oregon, surrounded by dense forest and miles away from the nearest town. It wasn't uncommon for hours to pass without a single customer, especially on nights like this, cold, rainy, and pitch black. Josh liked the isolation. It gave him time to think, to unwind from the hectic pace of life. He would often bring a book or listen to music to pass the time, and the occasional trucker or late-night traveller provided brief moments of human interaction. But for the most part, it was just him, the hum of the fluorescent lights, and the quiet buzz of the security monitors. On this particular night, everything seemed normal. Josh had just finished restocking the shelves and was sitting behind the counter, flipping through a magazine, when the door chimed. He looked up, expecting to see a regular customer or perhaps a lost tourist, but what he saw made his heart skip a beat. 2 children, a boy and a girl, had entered the store. They were soaking wet from the rain, their clothes clinging to their small frames. But it wasn't their appearance that unnerved Josh. It was the way they moved. There was something unnatural about their stillness, the way they seemed to glide rather than walk. The children didn't say anything as they approached the counter. Josh felt a chill run down his spine as they drew closer. Their heads were bowed, faces hidden by their dripping hair. The girl reached the counter first and slowly lifted her head, revealing her face. Josh's breath caught in his throat. Her eyes, black as coal, deep as the night, stared back at him, empty and cold. Request. The boy lifted his head next, his eyes just as black and void of life as the girl's. For a moment the store was silent, the only sound the rain tapping against the windows. Then, in unison, the children spoke. Their voices were soft, almost a whisper, but there was something in the tone that made Josh's skin crawl. "Can we use the phone?" the girl asked, her voice flat and emotionless. Josh was frozen, unable to move or speak. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. He had heard stories, urban legends really, about black-eyed children, but he had always dismissed them as nonsense. Yet here they were, standing in front of him, as real as anything he had ever seen. The boy repeated the question, "Can we use the phone?" There was an urgency in his voice now, but still no emotion, no life. Josh's instincts screamed at him to say no, to tell them to leave, but something else, something he couldn't explain, compelled him to help them. He pointed to the payphone at the back of the store, his hand shaking. "Over there," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. The children turned in unison and began walking toward the phone. As they moved away, Josh felt a sudden pressure in the air, like the atmosphere had thickened. The lights above flickered, and for a moment it felt like the entire store was going to collapse in on itself. Josh watched as the children reached the payphone. They didn't pick up the receiver. Instead, they stood there, motionless, their backs to him. The pressure in the air grew stronger, and Josh felt like he was suffocating. He wanted to run, to get out of there, but his legs refused to move. The disappearance. Suddenly, the lights in the store went out, plunging the room into darkness. Josh's heart pounded in his chest as he fumbled for his flashlight, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He managed to turn it on, the beam cutting through the darkness, but when he pointed it toward the payphone, the children were gone. Josh's breath came in ragged gasps as he scanned the store, but there was no sign of them. The door hadn't chimed, and the security monitor showed nothing but static. It was as if they had simply vanished into thin air. The lights flickered back on, and the store returned to normal, but Josh knew something wasn't right. He rushed to the back of the store, his flashlight still in hand, but the payphone was empty. There was no trace of the children, no sign that they had ever been there. Josh's mind raced as he tried to process what had just happened. Had he imagined it? Was it some kind of hallucination? But deep down, he knew what he had seen was real. The black-eyed children were real, and they had been in his store. The surveillance footage. Desperate for answers, Josh rushed to the security room and rewound the surveillance footage. His hands shook as he fast-forwarded through the tape, watching the empty store for any sign of the children. And then, there they were, walking through the door, just as he had seen them. Josh's heart pounded as he watched the footage. The children's movements were just as unnatural on the tape as they had been in real life. But, as the footage continued, something even more disturbing happened. When the children looked up at the camera, the tape distorted, the image warping and flickering, as if the camera itself was reacting to their presence. The audio was filled with strange static, a low hum that grew louder as the children approached the payphone. And then, just as in real life, the lights went out on the tape, plunging the store into darkness. When the lights came back on, the children were gone, just as they had been in reality. Josh replayed the footage over and over, trying to make sense of it, but each time, the result was the same. The black-eyed children had been there, and the tape had captured it all, albeit distorted and eerie, as if the technology itself was rebelling against their presence. The aftermath. Josh didn't know what to do with the footage. He was terrified to show it to anyone, fearing they would think he was crazy. But at the same time, he knew he couldn't keep it to himself. This was proof, tangible evidence that the black-eyed children were real, that they existed in the shadows of our world. He eventually confided in a close friend, another night shift worker at a nearby convenience store. The friend watched the footage in silence, his face growing pale as he took in the distorted images and unsettling audio. When the tape finished, he simply nodded, his eyes wide with fear. He had heard stories too, stories of black-eyed children appearing in the dead of night, asking for help, only to disappear without a trace. The two of them made a pact to keep the footage secret, sharing it only with those they trusted. But the fear remained, gnawing at the edges of their consciousness, a constant reminder that the world was not as safe as they had once believed. Josh continued to work the night shift at the gas station, but he was never the same. Every time the door chimed, his heart would race, and he would brace himself for the possibility of seeing those black eyes again. The isolation that he once cherished now felt suffocating, the quiet solitude a breeding ground for his fear. The surveillance footage was eventually leaked online, where it became the subject of much debate and speculation. Some claimed it was a hoax, a clever bit of editing, while others insisted it was real, a glimpse into the dark, unknown corners of our world. But for Josh, there was no doubt. The black-eyed children were real, and they had visited his store that fateful night, leaving behind a trail of fear and unanswered questions. Number 2. The phone call in Cincinnati, Ohio. Imagine picking up the phone late at night, only to hear the chilling voice of a child on the other end, asking for help. This is precisely what happened to Angela Reed, a mother of 3, who experienced one of the most disturbing encounters with black-eyed children to date. The midnight phone call. Angela Reed was a loving mother of 3 and a devoted wife. Her life in Cincinnati, Ohio, was as normal as could be. School runs, soccer practices, and weekend barbecues filled her days. She was the kind of woman who always had everything under control, her home a place of warmth and safety. But one night in early spring, all of that changed. It was a little after 2 a.m. when the phone rang. Angela was downstairs finishing up some late-night cleaning when the shrill sound cut through the quiet of the house. She hesitated for a moment, wondering who could be calling at such an hour. Her first thought was of her children. Perhaps one of them had gotten into trouble, or maybe it was an emergency. She picked up the phone, pressing it to her ear. "Hello?" she said, her voice tinged with concern. There was a brief pause on the other end, and then she heard it. A soft, childlike voice barely above a whisper. "Can you help us?" Angela's heart skipped a beat. The voice was that of a young boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old. His tone was flat, almost robotic, devoid of the natural inflections of a child's voice. It sent a shiver down her spine. "Who is this?" Angela asked, her voice trembling slightly. The boy didn't answer her question. Instead, he repeated his plea. "Can you help us?" Angela's mind raced. Was this some kind of prank? But the voice didn't sound like a prankster. It sounded too real, too desperate. She felt a strange mix of fear and maternal instinct. She wanted to help, but something about the situation didn't feel right. "Where are you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the unease gnawing at her. There was another pause, and then the boy spoke again. "We're outside." The fear sets. In Angela's blood ran cold. She glanced at the clock on the wall, 2:13 a.m. Who would be outside at this hour, and why would a child be calling her? She felt a surge of panic as she rushed to the window, her heart pounding in her chest. She pulled back the curtain and looked out into the dark street. At first, she saw nothing, just the empty road and the dim glow of the streetlights. But then, her eyes caught movement on the sidewalk in front of her house. There, standing perfectly still, were 2 children, a boy and a girl, just as the voice had described. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothes that seemed out of place in the modern world. The boy wore a button-up shirt and shorts, while the girl had on a plain dress with a lace collar. They stood side by side, their heads tilted slightly as if they were waiting for something. Angela's breath caught in her throat as she noticed their eyes. They were black, completely black, with no whites, no irises, just inky voids that seemed to absorb all light. The children stared directly at her, their faces expressionless, their eyes unblinking. Panic gripped Angela as she dropped the curtain and stumbled back from the window. Her mind raced with questions. Who were these children? Why were they outside her house? And most importantly, what did they want? She picked up the phone again, intending to call the police, but her hands were shaking so badly that she could barely dial the number. As she pressed the phone to her ear, she realized that the line was still open. The boy was still on the other end. "Please help us," the boy said again, his voice sending a chill down her spine. Angela's fear turned to terror as she realized something else. The call had been made to her landline, but she had answered it on her cell phone. How was that possible? The landline was in the kitchen, far from where she had been when the call came in. She hung up the phone and immediately dialed 911, her fingers fumbling over the keypad. The operator answered quickly, and Angela blurted out what she had seen, her words tumbling over each other in a rush of fear and confusion. The operator assured her that a patrol car would be sent to her address immediately, but Angela couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She stayed on the line, her eyes darting to the window, half expecting the children to be standing there, watching her. The disappearance. It felt like hours before the police arrived, though in reality it was only minutes. The patrol car pulled up in front of her house, its lights flashing in the darkness. 2 officers stepped out. their flashlights cutting through the night as they approached her front door. Angela opened the door, her hands still trembling, and quickly explained what had happened. The officers listened intently, though she could see the skepticism in their eyes. They assured her that they would search the area, but Angela could tell they didn't believe her. Not really. The officers swept the yard and the surrounding streets, but there was no sign of the children. No footprints, no trace of their presence at all. They even checked the phone records, but the call had been traced back to her own house, to the landline in the kitchen, just as Angela had feared. The officers tried to reassure her, suggesting that it might have been a prank or perhaps a dream. But Angela knew what she had seen, what she had heard. The children had been real, and they had called her for help. After the officers left, Angela was too shaken to sleep. She stayed up all night, her mind racing with questions and fears. She kept replaying the events in her head, trying to make sense of what had happened, but nothing added up. The lingering fear. In the days that followed, Angela couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every time she walked past the window, she half expected to see the children standing outside, their black eyes staring at her. The fear gnawed at her, a constant presence that she couldn't escape. She tried to go about her daily life, but the experience had changed her. She was jumpy, paranoid, always looking over her shoulder. Her husband noticed the change, but Angela couldn't bring herself to tell him the full story. How could she explain something so unbelievable, so terrifying? She began researching black-eyed children online, hoping to find some explanation, some answer to what she had experienced. What she found only deepened her fear. There were countless stories, just like hers, people from all over the world reporting encounters with black-eyed children. The stories were all eerily similar, children with black eyes appearing out of nowhere, asking for help, only to disappear without a trace. Theories abounded, ranging from the paranormal to the extraterrestrial, but none of them offered any real comfort. The more she read, the more Angela became convinced that these children were something beyond human, something ancient and malevolent. Despite her fear, Angela couldn't let go of the incident. She kept the phone call logs and the police report, a grim reminder of what had happened. She knew she might never get answers, but she also knew she would never forget that night, the voice on the phone, and the black-eyed children who had asked for her help. So what's the most credible recent sighting of the black-eyed children? Before we get number one, like, subscribe, share, and get notified for more spine-chilling mysteries. Number one, the security camera footage from a Las Vegas suburb. What began as a typical night for the security team of a gated community in Las Vegas quickly turned into a horrifying ordeal that left them questioning their very sanity. The evidence they uncovered remains one of the most compelling cases of black-eyed children sightings in modern history. The quiet suburb, the gated community of Shadow Creek Estates, was known for its quiet, peaceful atmosphere. Tucked away in the outskirts of Las Vegas, it was a place where the wealthy retreated from the hustle and bustle of the city. The streets were lined with palm trees, the houses large and luxurious, and the residents enjoyed a life of privacy and security. The community was protected by a state-of-the-art security system, with cameras positioned at every entrance and throughout the neighborhood. A small team of security guards monitored the feeds 24/7, ensuring that nothing out of the ordinary ever happened within the gated confines. On the night of the incident, the security team was down to 2 guards, Mike Hansen, a seasoned professional with years of experience, and his younger colleague Jason Reed, who was still new to the job. It was a quiet night, as most nights were, with nothing more than the occasional car passing through the gates. But everything changed just after 1 a.m, when the security monitors picked up something unusual at the entrance gate. The figures at the gate Mike was the first to notice it, a pair of small figures standing just outside the entrance gate. At first, he thought they were just children playing a late-night prank, but as he zoomed in on the camera feed, his stomach dropped. The figures were indeed children, a boy and a girl, both dressed in tattered, outdated clothing that looked like it had come from another era. The boy wore a worn-out suit, while the girl was dressed in a dirty white dress. But it was their eyes that made Mike's blood run cold, completely black, with no whites or irises, just empty voids that seemed to suck in all the light around them. Mike called Jason over to look at the feed, and the younger guard's face paled as he took in the sight. "What the hell are they doing?" Jason asked, his voice trembling. The children stood perfectly still, staring directly into the camera, as if they knew they were being watched. They didn't move, didn't speak, just stared, their black eyes unblinking. Mike and Jason exchanged uneasy glances, neither of them sure what to do. "Should we call the cops?" Jason asked, his hand hovering over the phone. "Not yet," Mike replied, though he wasn't sure why. Something about the situation felt wrong, like calling the cops wouldn't solve anything, wouldn't help. "Let's just keep an eye on them for now." For nearly an hour the children remained at the gate, unmoving, their eyes fixed on the camera. Mike and Jason watched in growing discomfort, the silence in the security room thick with tension. Then, without warning, the children began to move. They walked slowly, deliberately, toward the gate, their heads tilted slightly, as if listening to something only they could hear. The lights go out. As the children approached the gate, something strange began to happen. The streetlights lining the entrance flickered, then went out one by one, plunging the area into darkness. The only light came from the camera's night vision, casting the children in an eerie greenish glow. "They're coming in," Jason said, his voice barely above a whisper. Mike didn't respond. He was transfixed by the sight on the monitor, a growing sense of dread filling his chest. The children reached the gate and stopped, staring up at the camera once more. And then, as if in response to some unspoken command, the gate began to open. "What the hell?" Jason exclaimed, his eyes wide with shock. "Did you open the gate?" "No," Mike replied, his voice shaking. "I didn't touch anything." The gate swung open slowly, creaking on its hinges, and the children stepped inside. They moved with an unnatural grace, their feet barely making a sound on the pavement. Mike and Jason watched in stunned silence as the children walked down the main street, heading straight for one of the houses. The lights in the security room flickered, and Mike felt a sudden pressure in his chest, like the air had been sucked out of the room. He struggled to breathe, his heart pounding in his ears. He knew something was terribly wrong, but he couldn't look away from the monitor. The children reached the house, a large two-story mansion at the end of the street. They stopped at the front door, standing side by side, their black eyes staring at the heavy wooden door. And then, without anyone touching it, the door swung open. The House of Ash. Mike and Jason watched in horror as the children stepped inside the house, the door closing behind them with a soft click. The lights in the security room flickered again, and for a moment the monitors went dark. When the feed came back on, the house was still, the street outside empty. The children were gone. Mike and Jason sat in stunned silence, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. It was Jason who finally broke the silence. "We have to check it out," he said, though his voice was filled with fear. Mike nodded, though every instinct told him to stay put. They grabbed their flashlights and weapons and headed out into the night, their footsteps echoing in the quiet streets. As they approached the house, a sense of dread settled over them, heavy and suffocating. The front door was closed, just as it had been before the children arrived. Mike hesitated before reaching out to knock, his hand trembling. The door creaked open at his touch, and the two guards stepped inside, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The house was eerily silent, the air thick with the smell of something burnt. They moved through the rooms cautiously, their eyes darting to every shadow, every corner. But the house was empty, no sign of the children, no sign of anyone at all. And then they reached the living room. The sight that greeted them was unlike anything they had ever seen. The walls were covered in strange symbols, drawn in what appeared to be ash. The furniture was overturned, the floors littered with broken glass and debris. But there was no sign of forced entry, no indication that anyone had been there. In the center of the room, directly beneath the chandelier, was a large, circular mark on the floor, charred as if something had burned there. But there was no fire, no smoke, no heat. Mike and Jason exchanged a look of pure terror. They knew without a doubt that this was the work of the black-eyed children. Whatever they were, whatever they wanted, they had left their mark on this house, a mark that defied explanation. The evidence. The security team documented everything, photographs, reports, and most importantly, the security camera footage. The footage was reviewed by both the local authorities and paranormal experts, but no one could provide a clear explanation for what had happened. The police conducted a thorough investigation, but they found no evidence of a break-in, no trace of the children, and no logical explanation for the strange symbols and burn marks in the house. The homeowner, who had been out of town at the time, was left with more questions than answers. The footage was eventually leaked online, where it became a sensation among paranormal enthusiasts. The images of the black-eyed children standing at the gate, their black eyes staring into the camera, sent chills down the spines of viewers around the world. But for Mike and Jason, the incident was more than just a strange occurrence. It was a life-altering experience. They both left their jobs at the security company shortly afterward, unable to shake the fear that had taken root in their minds. They knew that what they had seen was real, and that the black-eyed children were out there, somewhere, waiting. The house in Shadow Creek Estates was eventually sold, but its reputation as a haunted location persisted. The new owners reported strange occurrences, unexplained noises, objects moving on their own, and a persistent sense of being watched. The story of the black-eyed children in Las Vegas remains one of the most compelling and terrifying cases in modern history. The evidence is undeniable, the fear palpable, and the mystery unsolved. Whatever these children are, wherever they come from, they leave behind a trail of fear and unanswered questions. A reminder that the world is full of things that we cannot explain, and that some doors should never be opened. These 5 cases represent the most unsettling and tangible encounters with black-eyed children in modern times. Each incident is supported by physical evidence, be it footage, police reports, or eyewitness testimony, that challenges the boundaries of what we consider possible. The fear and confusion experienced by those who encountered these children are palpable, a testament to the terrifying reality of their presence. As you turn off the lights tonight, remember, the next knock on your door, the next ring of your phone, might be more than just an ordinary disturbance. It might be an invitation from the unknown, a call from the black-eyed children, waiting for you to answer, and once you do, you may never see the world the same way again.